first thing you're going to want to know whenever you're playing a battle in Warhammer 40k is how to move your units of the army about. Now, Warhammer 40k has a lot of different kinds of vehicles and soldier types, and we've laid out a few here on the table, and Daryl's going to point them out to you. We have infantry,
just regular guys on foot generally.
Jump units.
These guys have big like rocket packs in their back.
So an infantry unit would move about 6 inches, whereas a jump unit would move up to 12 inches. Now, movement is on page 425. There is a chart on that page which lists every kind of type of unit and the distance it can move. As well as that, it also gives the difficult terrain effect. So if you're trying to go through a piece of terrain that is considered difficult, it tells you how to deal with that. You also have jump packs not using their jump pack, in which case they would just move 6 inches as standard.
Sometimes some terrain affects jump pack guys by jumping into it, so sometimes it's just better to walk through the terrain.
You also have beasts, cavalry, bikes and jet bikes, and they all move up to 12 inches. And then you have monstrous creatures that can move up to 6 inches, artillery and jetpack units using their jetpacks, they can also move up to 6 inches. And then you have skimmers, which can move up to 12 inches, and walkers, such as this Space Marine Dreadnought, and he can move up to 6 inches.
Yep, this killer can.
You also have things like flyers, which are kind of the aircraft and bombers that are available to you in 40k, and they move between 18 and 36 inches. So remember, they have a minimum amount of distance that they have to move because they're flying. If they're not moving, they're falling.
Yes.
And then finally, you have flying monstrous creatures, and they move between 12 and 24 inches, and then you have all other vehicles move between 0 and 12 inches. Now, that just shows you the wealth of different kinds of units that are available to the game system of Warhammer 40k. But whenever you actually come to move a unit itself, it's very, very easy. You simply find out the distance that the unit can move. So in this instance, it's a jump pack, so I know it can move up to 12 inches. Then you decide how far it's actually going to move. So you might decide it's only going to move 8 of those 12 inches. And then you simply measure from the front of the base of that model. Every model has a base, just simply like that. So you measure from the front of the base, and then from there you measure up to your 8 inches or 12 inches or whatever it's going to move. And you do that for each model in the unit that you're going to move. So it's very, very simple. If you're going to try and move around a corner, you just take your 8 inches and you move the first part, and then you move your tape measure and move the last part. Just making sure you don't move anything more than the allowed amount of movement that you have.
Some of these guys that have like jump packs and jet packs are able to just move over walls and obstacles like that. There are trees and things that are in their way, and it doesn't cost them any movement. Generally, other guys, it's usually the guys that are on foot, have to roll. It's generally for most of them, but it's in this chart at the back of the book. You roll 2 dice, and you can move up to the highest total number you get. But as soon as you roll them 2 dice, you're stuck with that. You can't go, I roll double ones, I don't fancy that. I'll just move 3 inches instead because I can.
Now the other thing that units can do, especially infantry units, they can run.
Yes.
Darryl, can you explain the rules of run?
After you've did your movement, if we take it like our Terminators here have moved, after the movement phase, after you've moved all your models, you get into the shooting phase. And in the shooting phase, you can shoot, obviously, but you can also elect to run. Pretty much everybody that wants to run rolls 1 d6, as it'll say in the book. You roll that, and I get a 6 here, so my Terminators would be able to run up to 6 inches. With any of this movement, you have to remember, you're not always stuck having to move the total. Yeah. It's always up to that amount of inches.
If you want to learn more about the run rule, you'll find it on page 14 of the main rule book.
The only time basically you can't run is all the units have a certain coherency that in the movement phase that guys like infantry, all these guys here all have to remain within 2 inches of each other. So in your movement, at your end of your movement, you'll have to remain within 2 inches of each other.
Unit coherency is an important thing to try and remember, and basically it just stops your unit from soldiers wandering all over the board. It means that the unit stays as a unit. And if a model basically has to stay within 2 inches of another unit, now, or another model, that could work like that as a line. So these guys are all within 2 inches of each other, so you could spread them out in a line, or you can run them in a group as such. And that is pretty much how coherency works. And they must do it. You don't really have a choice there. No. You have to keep them in coherency.
The only time you lose coherency is as models die, and then at the start of the next movement phase, you have to move back into coherency.
Yeah. So that gives you a rundown on how to move, how to run. The other type of movement you'll probably find yourself carrying out is called a charge. Darryl, can you give us an indication on how a model charges?
Again, it's in the rulebook. It's on page 428. Lots of the different models, because we have different types, have different ways of charging. But generally,
on 428, you will find a chart down here, and it'll give you a complete rundown on how each of the models actually charge.
After you've finished your shooting phase and you're into the actual charging and to fight the other guy, generally, for most of the models, you roll 2d6. You add this together. My Terminators here only managed to get 3 inches, so they get the option to charge 3. They would have to charge 3 inches, but here I'm too far out, so I don't get the charge. Ideally, I rolled 8 inches here.
Yeah. So the way this works is every unit, okay, basically rolls 2d6 in normal circumstances over normal ground. They all roll 2d6, add them together, and that gives you how much they can charge. There is one slight difference to that, and that's jump units using their jump packs. If they roll 2d6, they get to re-roll it if you don't like the result. But you have to stick with the second result that you roll.
You can't go back and say, I fancy the first result. As soon as you decide to re-roll any of the rolls in this game, you're stuck with the second result. You can't go back.
Again, things get a little bit more complex whenever you start to work out the effects of difficult terrain. So if they're charging through a swamp or something like that, it would be considered difficult terrain. You would always work that out with your opponent beforehand. And some models then do 3d6 and discard the highest dice.
Yeah, again, it's just straightforward. You roll your 3 dice, and here I would have to discard the 6. So I got 5 inches for my Terminators.
So for your first games, all you need to know is that if you're going to charge your opponent, just roll 2d6. And if you've got a jump pack, if you don't like the score, you can roll again. Yep. But remember, you'll have to stick with it. So let's talk about the different types of terrain, Darryl, and how they might affect a movement. What are the main types of terrain?
The main standard types of terrain are difficult terrain, dangerous terrain, and impassable terrain. Impassable terrain could be something as simple as a large wall you just can't get through. It could be a huge big rock. It could be a chasm, a river in the middle of the board that your guys just can't get across.
Yeah.
Dangerous terrain are things like these ruins here. These would be classed as a ruin. And because it's a half fallen down building, as you move through it, you would have to take dangerous terrain tests for each one of your models. The dangerous terrain test is as simple as each guy that would have moved through the dangerous terrain would have to roll 1d6 each. So you just roll for each individual guy, and anybody that rolls a 1 takes a wound. Mm-hmm. Now, in 6th edition, you get a regular armor save against it. So for a Terminator to get through dangerous terrain, it's not that dangerous for him.
Yeah.
We're something like an Orc boy here who only has a 6-up armor save, 6+ armor save. It is more dangerous for him. But again, you have to roll your 2d6 to see how far you get through the dangerous terrain. Mm-hmm. And the final one is just difficult terrain, which is just broken, rough ground that will slow you down. And you just roll your 2d6, you select the highest, and that's how far you move through difficult terrain. That's your 3 main types of terrain.
Now, if you're new to the game and you're wondering what an armor save is, basically a lot of the models are wearing what would be considered armor, or they have skin that's so thick that it could be considered a type of armor. And whenever you get hit by a weapon, whether that's like a sword or some kind of bullet fired from, I don't know, any kind of gun, you get the opportunity to try and make a save. In other words, to say that it pinged off the armor rather than hurting you. And later on in these videos, we'll be discussing armor saves. But whenever we're talking about an armor save, that's really all it is. It's a roll of the dice just to see if what hit you actually hurt you. And it's an opportunity to shake it off. Well, guys, there's the basics of movement. Basically, most units over just normal ground, they'll just move their 6 inches or they're up to 12 inches. If they're trying to run, You just roll a dice and see how much further you can move. If you're going to charge another unit, you roll both dice and you add them together and see how far you can charge. And if you come up against the different types of terrain, remember there are effects that terrain will have on you. But for your first games, don't be afraid to ignore things like terrain effects and stuff like that, and just play on what would be considered normal ground. There's no problem with simplifying these rules and adding the more complex ones later on. Anyway, guys, stick with us. We'll move on to the next part.